The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Alrighty, hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Drew English. I am the Program Coordinator and Client Experience Associate here at the Exit Planning Institute. I am gathered today here with Greg Voisin. Greg is an author, speaker, thought leader, and entrepreneur. He is a thought leader in the personal growth and human potential movement. He is the founder of Inside Personal Growth. And he's also the author of a new book entitled Hacking the Gap A Journey from Institution to Innovation and Beyond. He's also the co-author with John Shelby of Wisdom, Wellness, and Redefining Work. Greg is joining us today to talk about the psychology of succession planning. Before I turn it over to Greg and kind of dive into the presentation today, a few housekeeping notes from myself. First off, the webinar is being recorded. The recording of the webinar will be sent out later today. So just look for an email from myself with that recording. When you get the recording, please click it, choose to download, and therefore you'll be able to listen to the entire webinar in full. Secondly, if you have any questions, comments, anything you would like to share for the group, there is a questions box on the drop-down of menu of GoToWebinar. We ask that you type in your question there. That will alert me you do have a question, and then I can facilitate those over to Greg at the end of the presentation. But with that, I won't take any more of Greg's time, and we'll dive into the psychology of succession planning. So Greg, it is all you.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you everybody who's out there listening right now, wherever you're listening from. Good day to you, good afternoon, good morning. I know we're crossing all kinds of time zones, so thank you. A little bit, Drew gave you a background about me. I'm an author, an entrepreneur, speaker. I've had 5 startups myself and companies that I've actually sold off. I have a background in financial services, as well as a master's degree in spiritual psychology, which is kind of an interesting degree. So I blended my undergrad finance and business background, business degrees, along with psychology, and have been working with business owners extensively now for in excess of 35 plus years, trying to figure out the mindset of entrepreneurs. Thus, this recent book called Hacking the Gap, A Journey from Intuition to Innovation and Beyond. I'll correct Drew on that title. Why don't we just go ahead and start off here, and as you go along, what I'd like you to do is really be thinking of some questions about your clients, your situation, the succession planning you're doing currently right now, because that's how we can make this webinar very interactive and a lot more juicy, and I will leave time for that in the end. I know we're all really aware of the statistics. We don't need to belabor this slide too much. We know that going from first generation to second generation, and then 50% don't survive that transition. And I think much of that is due to not the fact that we aren't doing our jobs, it's the fact that many of the business owners that we have, they're just not listening to us, right, and taking the advice. And the question that you have psychologically is then, why not? Why aren't they listening to us? And I think part of that is a result of the founders really are usually the obstacles. They're their own obstacles. And we're going to talk about ego here. We're going to talk about mindfulness. We're going to talk about awareness. We're going to talk about cognitive dissonance. We'll be talking about the fear of future, the imagined future, and how actually you, as advisors, can assist your clients in overcoming many of these psychological issues. You know, founders of businesses, as I've been a serial entrepreneur, accused of being the main obstacle. Their unwillingness to really let go, and their failure to plan for succession planning is because of fear of letting go, right? So for all of us, it's like, okay, I'm sitting here, I've worked 20 years, 30 years, 40 years building this business, and now you're asking me to transition that business down to another generation, or you're going to do a merger and acquisition with another company. This is, as we all know, not to be redundant, this is actually the biggest thing that a business owner, biggest decision a business owner will probably ever make in their lifetime. Yet people with this psychological mind frame, they're used to making decisions. They're used to being their own advisor, right? So what I tell advisors, and I inform people, including myself, remind you to ask questions that get the business owners to reflect on the issues. Now, here's the most important thing there. You want them in the first round of questions that you would be asking them to actually get them to reflect on questions that are in the present moment, being here now. So that is, what are your main problems that you have today? And it might be management. It might be an issue of profitability. It might be an issue of building this business's EBITDA to a point of that it's worth selling. There's a lot of current things. But get them thinking about their own problems, because they all love solving problems. And don't force your initial conversation into the future. Not yet. You don't have permission on your first, second interview to possibly get that permission to push them into the future. You will, at some point, as you build their trust, be able to get them to move into the future. But you have to be what I call somebody who is very compassionate and empathetic listener. Not actually coming out with all kinds of solutions. What we do as advisors, we frequently think that what we have to say is really important. They need to hear it, and they need to hear it right away so we can help them solve those problems. Examine the answers to the questions in the form of proximal goals, whether that's interim goals for accomplishment. That would be the first thing. So when you ask these questions about them, their current problems and issues, bring those back to your office or wherever, reflect on those questions, and take the time to really look at what are those incremental goals. You then, at your third or fourth or whatever interview it is, however you're there, you can develop a mind map. And I do recommend using mind mapping tools. One of them that I use quite successfully during these meetings is something called iMindMap 10. It's a visual mind mapping software program. So keep in mind that you're the quarterback of their mind and you're their accountability coach, okay? So your job is to hold and keep them present, to make them mindful, to make them extremely aware. And your biggest thing that you're going to actually do is you're going to remove what's called the cognitive dissonance. Many of you out there are probably familiar with this term. This isn't something that's unusual, but it's a psychological term that's used. And what it is the dissonance between the present and the future. So right now, they have issues. That doesn't mean the issues are going to go away in the future. What your job is to remove the cognitive dissonance in their mind between, hey, I'm releasing this business, what am I going to do? Am I going to have enough cash? Can my son or daughter or my family run this business? Will they run this business into the ground? Will I ever see the money that I expect to see from the business? All of those questions that are bubbling up in their mind. Is this going to cause conflict with my son or my daughter? How am I going to equal out my estate? How am I going to make all of this happen? You'll get there, right? It will get there. But family businesses only change when the pain is so great that they can't stay where they are, okay? So I'm going to use a real life example. I had a 40-person company recently, and a lot of my prospects, just so people understand this, come not from the parents themselves, because I do a lot of family business planning. It actually comes from the kids in the business. So the kids find out about me and they say, hey, Greg, we've been working in this business 17, 20 years, and our parents have really never let us know too much about the business. We don't know much about the finances. You know, we're the director of sales, we're in marketing, we're in whatever position they're in, we're in operations, but truly, you know, we're kind of learning part of this business, but we don't understand it all. And by the way, we don't have any stock in the business, whether it's a C or an S Corp or an LLC, it doesn't matter. They don't have much ownership interest. And their big pain, the big pain is that these younger generation who've been there 17, 20 years, they're about ready to leave. They're saying, hey, we're going to tell our parents we're going to leave. And frequently, that is a big enough pain that what ends up happening is those business owners will virtually say, hey, I'm interested in talking now. I can see that this is something that could tear our company apart. That our personal lives, meaning parents and children, that there's a chasm here. And we have to cross this chasm, and we've got to fix it. So they have 4 choices, obviously. And those choices are: 1, sell the business or transfer it to the children, shut the business down, merge the business, or stay the same. So if they decide to stay the same, the key question they must decide are, do they all stay in the business together, or does someone exit? Is it time for the senior generation to pass the company on to the next generation, or do they bring in this professional manager to run the business? But you only have one role, and one role only, that's really important. And again, it's about the fear of the future, the imagined future, and the cognitive dissonance. So you need to learn to keep your prospects present from a psychological standpoint. You need to learn to ask questions focused on the now initially. You need to ask questions that'll move them to the future, but only when you have that trust and permission to move them to the future. We actually call this an ideal scene. You're actually painting an ideal scene for your client of the future. So when I say the advisor needs to move with grace and acceptance, whoops, sorry about that. Let me go back. You're going to move with grace and acceptance. Resist the fact that you have a solution right away. I think that's the biggest challenge that most advisors would probably say. And then secondly, don't get attached to the outcome. It's always going to change. The outcome of what you're trying to build or design for them is going to change. The third thing would be learn to flow with your clients. If you're providing any level of challenge, most of these entrepreneurs, whether they're men or they're women, they've been strong themselves, they've built a big company. You're there to help guide them as a quarterback through this. You're the trusted confidant, hopefully, that they're gonna, and the key is trusted. You need to be really empathetic. You need to listen with compassion, and you need to learn how to connect the dots of the subconscious mind. It's really, really important to learn how to do that. Just as somebody is developing anything, all of the subconscious mind is doing is replaying tapes for your clients. And those tapes can be positive or negative. And another thing that draws into this is the ego. And we're going to talk about that as well. Because the ego is a big thing here. And most people that are doing succession planning, whether you're a CPA, or you're an attorney who's listening right now, or you're a tax advisor, or you're just strictly a financial advisor, the reality is everybody has an ego. The question is, can we remove the ego to come up with a solution together? And I think Steve Jobs used to say this. You know, everybody said something about Steve Jobs was like, wow, he was kind of hard to work with, right? We've all seen that. And he wasn't hard to work with when it came to actually getting inside the room with the team, and the team sitting there and actually developing product. That's where he removed his ego. We all have egos. The question is, can we get to the fact where we're letting our soul and we're hearing our soul? Now, I'm using some terms here that most people out there listening are going, well, I don't know if this business person's going to listen to that. But you know, there's elements of this. There's the mental element, there's the physical element, there's the spiritual element. And I am speaking about the spiritual element. The reality is that many of your clients, while they may not express it to you, the psychology of this has to do with getting to listening to that small inner voice inside of them that frequently guides them, because most business people will tell you their best decisions were made as a result of listening to their intuition. Now, there may be some contradictory statistical data out there about intuition, but if you ask any person, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, all of the people who built some pretty fantastic companies, Warren Buffett, they've all written articles about intuition and how important that intuition was. So the conflicting roles in succession, let's go there. They don't want to look like they're seeking advice. They don't want to feel weak. They don't see the value and rationale behind it, right? While others feel that it demonstrates their incompetence to lead a family and hand over the business to the next generation. So your role is to ask questions that remove these doubts in their mind, right? So, and what's happening is they're having this conflict about the fear. The fear of taking action, as I say, frequently steals physical time. As many of you know who've worked on succession cases, these things can take a very long time, and you have to be extremely patient to move them through this process. Addressing their mortality and impermanence. We haven't even talked about the fact of impermanence, but impermanence actually does come up in their mind. This is the point of like, well, okay, the business is impermanent. I'm impermanent. Personally, I'm impermanent. So the reality is that this is something we will all face in our lifetime. We're not going to get beyond the question of death. And good exit planners, all of us, address this. The question is, from a physical, mental, and spiritual standpoint, how are we addressing that? How are we convincing them that this is not a sign of weakness, but it's a reality? This is a reality we all have to face. And it really has to do with how you frame your questions, when you frame your questions, what kind of answers you get to those questions, and what feedback you give to those questions. So we look at you as an advisor. You're the independent third-party observer. As the observer, you get to observe sometimes, and as the person who's the counselor, you get to ask questions. But the reality is, it might not always be you asking those questions. You might be in a room with the CPA or the attorney or whoever, part of your team, the team that's advising them, and everybody's asking questions. Your job is to take and connect the dots so that you can be the quarterback and make sure those questions are valuable to them. So this issue of death and finality of dying, this issue of impermanence, this whole issue of mortality is an issue. Death is not an easy subject to talk about, nor is retirement for rugged individuals and entrepreneurs in a family business. These individuals are strong. They've held this together for a long time. So it's about this reluctance to change the management of the company, right? So the loss of control of that business, the evaluation of the potential new owners. Much risk is in the decision making if it's incorrect. They should, not wait until their back's against the wall. And again, I come back to this, that our position as advisors, as trusted advisors, is so that when their backs are against the wall, we're trying for them not to get there. But if that's when you kind of pick up a prospect, and many times we do, we get prospects at that stage where they feel like their backs are against the wall. Your job is to remove that cognitive dissonance. Your job is to do that through a series of questions. And your job is to listen with compassion and empathy. Your job is to remove their ego in actually answering that, or at least get them to a point where they can hear that intuition. Now, when they hear that intuition, you need to be hearing your own intuition. And that is something that you, meaning you and us as advisors, we have to work on. Actually developing that is a very interesting opportunity for everyone. So no one goes through the work, the risk, the sacrifice of starting a business without hoping it will last. Building value that endures is the dream of every entrepreneur and every business person. And unless obviously they're in a lifestyle business. Yet in many businesses, too little of that work goes into determining who will take over when the founders leave the stage, right? And again, we know these things. The issue is, how are you addressing it? And that's the fact here, is the psychology of succession planning is so, so important. You know, businesses working with a succession plan can invite disruption, uncertainty, conflict, and endangers future competitiveness. So again, you can position yourself that that's very important. You know, without this succession plan, you're looking at this uncertainty. Well, uncertainty and conflict actually is fear. It's you can actually take this in any way you want, but uncertainty is something that no business owner what they are always trying to do is figure out how they can remove that uncertainty. You're actually addressing one of the big uncertainties in their life, which is the transferring of this business from their generation to the next, or a merger and acquisition. And that uncertainty has a lot of doubts in it for them. So the long-term survival of those businesses and the preservation of the wealth that they built depend upon that clear, and I say clear, and I'm going to repeat this, early focus on that succession plan. And to get that succession plan, you have to be willing to go out on a limb. You have to be willing to think out of a box. You have to be willing to do things that other succession planners or planners don't do. You have to be the one that brings the team together in a unified and synchronistic way to make certain that you're removing the cognitive dissonance in the owner's mind, in that owner's mind. All owners, managers usually have a personal vision to retire. You're actually painting what I call the ideal scene of the future. So here's some mindset about applications for action. Always seek to make your questions better and more in depth, no matter what questions they are, okay? We can always improve the questions. I think Drew, when he announced, he said I had a podcast show called Inside Personal Growth. I've actually had that show for over 12 years, and I've interviewed over 670 authors on business, personal growth, wellness, mastery, and spirituality, okay? I have to be the one that derives the questions for those interviews. You have to be the one that derives the questions for the interviews with your clients. Push the envelope when you're creating your questions. Ask questions which in essence wouldn't be your normal typical questions that you would ask. Be that independent observer of your clients' actions when you ask the questions. Provide constructive feedback and counsel. Choose your team of advisors carefully. When you're working with advisors, seek to get them to understand that the succession plan is not all about money. I think frequently what we do as advisors is we spend a lot of time focused on the money. I'm not saying the money isn't important, but the money is what's creating the dissonance, right? So if you can go in and in their mind, they've painted a picture that's clear, focused, and you've removed what's happening in the present moment. And it's almost like the rubber band effect, right? And you pull a rubber band and it swings back and it hits you on your wrist, right? You go, ow. The reality is the higher that dissonance is, the more difficult it is for them to actually see a clear future. Put yourself in their shoes. Empathize when providing advice to solve the problems, or I should say help to solve the problems. You're a co-creator with them. That's what you do. Be patient. This process takes a long time. And I started on my story and I realized that I got off track on it, but the 40-person company that I was talking about, the son or daughter that I got referred into, basically what ended up happening was, We had a 17-year, two sons in a business that were virtually, one didn't really want to be in management, the other was going to take the business over. And the owners were in their 60s, mid 60s, and the sons were in their late 30s, I think one early 40s. But the reality of that story is this, is that after 2 years, 2 full years of working with this client to create this, what I call ideal scene. And the ideal scene was the parents gradually moving out of the business, taking more vacations, creating that ideal scene for them that they could feel like they could do that and trust their sons to run this 40-person company. It took a long time. They didn't want to let go. And if you saw from my first slide, the reality about letting go is really, really important. Jumping that chasm and letting go of their fears of how they'll do it. And it doesn't matter if it's a 40-person company, a 400-person company, or a 4,000-person company. In the minds of the people that are running the business, the leaders of these companies, they all have those same psychological issues going on. And those psychological issues can be more complex in a big company because now you've got lots of managers and middle managers and all kinds of people in the company. But the reality is the same psychological factors exist. There is frequently fear, okay? Not all the time, but you have to identify that. There's frequently this huge chasm for them. How do I cross this chasm? How do I do that? Is this a leap of faith? They frequently are not listening to their intuition at all. Most people are very linear, they're very logical, they think their subconscious mind creates all the solutions. It's not always just the subconscious mind that's creating the solutions. There are many ways that we actually evolve and come up with solutions. And one of them is to listen deeply at a soul level, not at an ego level, because the ego is constantly speaking to you and to them. It speaks to us as well. I can't, I won't, this is too much. It's the one it's giving you the feedback, which isn't always positive. Yet we all have one, we have to deal with it. So remove the fear of the future, paint a great imagined future for them, learn to keep them in the present moment, ask questions that are focused on the now initially, ask questions moving them then into the future, paint pictures that solve their problems and create an ideal scene for the future. Listen with empathy and compassion. Move them out of their ego and into their soul and their intuition about making a decision. And trust the messages. Learn to trust the messages that they're receiving as being good solutions. And not only do they do that, you do that as well. So as advisors, you do that as well. I wanted to leave this open for questions in the end. And so Drew, I've given us enough time to basically be able to do that. If anybody out there would like to engage in a dialogue with this is a great opportunity to actually do that. Drew, are we open now?
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. We had a couple questions come in already, but for everyone else, if you have questions, please go ahead and type those in the question box at this moment. But first question for you, Greg. Can you please revisit the definition of cognitive dissonance?
Yes. So cognitive dissonance is the tension between the present and the future. So what happens is the mind paints a picture of the future, which sometimes is not rosy, right? It's not a good, clear picture. It's not a picture that you want to paint. It's the fear of things that'll happen that haven't even happened yet. Yet they always play those in their mind. So that dissonance is between, hey, this hasn't even happened yet you've already in your mind created a bleak picture of what the future is before. So your job and role is to remove or lessen that tension between the present moment, which nothing's actually happened in, and the future moment, which they're replaying in their mind. Oh, my son or daughter is going to run the company into the ground. Oh, I'll never get my money out of it. Oh, you know, if I merge with this company, What happens if their stock value drops? Oh, and that goes on and on and on, doesn't it? So the only thing you do is remove that cognitive dissonance.
Perfect. Second question for you. What is the ideal number of advisors involved in these interviews and debriefing sessions, i.e. offering feedback? It looks like they use a team approach for succession, but struggle with the number of players on the field at any time.
Well, I think the most important role is that you as a succession planner have built up trust with your client enough that they have allocated you, or sometimes it's not always just you, it is the team. But more importantly, look, there's a bunch of players on the field. They don't all get to call the plays. You have to be the person that's talking to the coach on the sidelines getting the play, right? So the reality is the coach is the client, right? In essence, you're actually running the play and you're executing for them to move the ball down the field. Those other players, whether it's the center or the guard or whoever, and I'm using a football analogy right now, but you have to huddle those people together, and everybody has to work in unison. So actually the answer to the number of people is there is no ideal number, but there is a usual. In most cases, the usual is obviously a CPA, which everybody here probably already knows. The usual is an attorney, either early on or later stages. The usual is a financial advisor, unless the people listening to this call are already the financial advisors. There might even be a psychologist involved. Frequently there is if it's big enough, and sometimes there's not. But those would be the players, Drew, that people would need to corral together, and hopefully the people that are listening to this are being considered as the primary person to actually be the quarterback for the succession plan.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with that, Greg. 100%. Next question was, do you have any ideas around identifying and promoting the successor before the incumbent departs?
Well, it's a great question, Drew. And the answer to the question is it depends, okay? And I hate to be so nonchalant about it or not have the answer, but that person who is chosen has to have the skill sets that the CEO and or the person running the company or the team that's running the company actually agrees to. So in this case, you've got, a son or a daughter or a couple of sons and a whole family, or you've got management, middle management, or people that are going to step up and potentially take over. Provided those people are willing to enter into some level of employment contract with some kind of arrangement and a buy-sell agreement or whatever it is that they're doing, and the owners and the team have faith, then they can start to do that. Many companies, I'm working on one that's an ESOP right now. So that brings up a whole new situation because the employees are going to take it over and the people are going to actually fade out. So I hope I answered that person's question, but it really kind of just depends on, do they trust who's going to take over? Have they done the profile of the kind of person they have? Do they have the commitment level from that person? And do they have the proper paperwork and documentation in place to actually make that gradual move over to the person or persons?
All right, awesome. Next question, is your book on Amazon?
Yes, it is. And for those of the listeners that are still aboard, if they want to send me an email at that email address, I think on Amazon it's $19. I will basically ship it to them. If they want to send me an email at greg@illuminate.net, and they can actually get that book. I'll turnkey that book for them for $10. So they'll save $9.
All right, thank you, Greg. Appreciate that.
So they can just send me an email, and we will ship it from our office, and it'll go out within a few days.
Perfect. Hopefully people take advantage of that. Sounds like a great deal.
Yeah, it is a good deal.
Next question for you, Greg. Can you give some examples of thoughtful questions that engage the business owner along the path?
Okay, two sets of those, Drew. One would be those questions that are initially focused on the present situation. Those kind of questions would really be questions like, who currently is involved in the management of the company? I mean, maybe everybody listening is going, well, that sounds pretty basic. Well, it is, but you need to find things out like that. What's your current financial situation? Where are your P&Ls and your balance sheets? What are your margins looking like? Those I call are present moment questions. Those are things that are easily and readily available right at their hands. Now, as you get deeper into it, then you have to move them into what I call ideal scene questions. These are future questions after you've done your analysis of this. So those questions would move them into the future, into an ideal scene that actually allows you to help paint a great picture. Those questions are something like, who might be the ideal person to take this business over and run it? Okay, they've always got an idea of that. Who initially do you trust the most to actually do this? Who are the people that are most likely going to exit this company in the next few years? How many replacements are we going to need, or if those replacements occur, in what departments might those replacements occur? So what you're doing is you're collecting data of those questions, and you take those questions in. What does the future trends of your business look like? That would be another one. In other words, is this business, are we, if you're in retail business today, well, obviously you're being attacked by all the onliners, and there's a lot of retailers that are headed either to sell out or move out of the business. But what are the trends? What are the future trends? What you want to get a beat on and an idea on is how you're going to connect the dots in the subconscious mind to, number one, help them get the highest value. How long is it going to take? And how do you paint that ideal scene for them of the steps that we're taking to execute on this succession plan? Those questions help you move to that ideal scene that paints that picture. And those questions are really future related questions. They're all kind of moving into the future. What do we need to do in the future? What's the future of this business? Is this got a rosy future, or is it dim or bleak? What do we maybe need to do with a new division of this company? Are we going to start up a new division in case you don't see the kind of profitability that you see in this particular one? So you have all kinds of questions you can ask in that area.
Another question here that came in. Do you have any strategies for how to talk with the business owner who is convinced his or her business is worth much more than what the market is willing to support, and what was determined in valuation?
That's an excellent question. If most business owners and most people listening that are still on this call really realize that most business owners think their business is worth more than it really is, very few of them are very realistic about it. I'm working on one right now where the father is selling to the son, and the first thing he came up with was a ridiculous number that he thought the business was worth. So I think you have to take an assessment of the assets. All good advisors are going to look at the assets. Is there property involved? Is there rent back? Can these people actually rent back to themselves and keep it in an LLC? And now you're getting into structure. But to get them to understand that there's other ways to derive the income other than the strategy of the sale of the business. Because all they're saying is, well, the value's got to be $2 million, and that's what I'm going to sell it to them for, or $4 million, or whatever it is. And that is not real. But if you can show them how you can derive income in other ways, they'll be willing to reduce the value of that business because they see other opportunities to actually do that. Lease back of trucks, lease back of buildings, all kinds of things that you would create during your creative process.
Perfect. And then last question for you, Greg, regarding your podcast. Is it available just on your website, or is it available on an app, like an Apple app or anything like that?
It's available at SoundCloud. It's also available at InsidePersonalGrowth.com. If you go to InsidePersonalGrowth.com, you'll see some very cool players that we just are using now, allowing you to blast it out to other people, get it pushed out and pushed around. But the reality is that you can fast forward on that player. Otherwise, you can go to SoundCloud and you can type in Inside Personal Growth and it'll pop up the 600 and something volumes. Also, if you go into archives at Inside Personal Growth, you will see the archive of all the business books, of all the interviews, people on personal growth, wellness, mastery, spirituality, whatever you're interested in listening to. And this is a great resource, by the way, for not only the advisors still listening, but actually the people that are your clients.
Yeah, and to that point, Greg, I hope all the attendees today can really take that to heart and really utilize the resources that not only Greg has for you, but as well as EPI has for you, and you could use that for not only yourself, but for your business owner clients as well. So I hope you definitely take advantage of Greg's book, the podcast, and then just having his contact information. I know speaking
And
for Greg and stuff.
Drew, if there are other people out there that have questions that we don't have time for right now or whatever, I'm more than happy to field emails. Just send them to greg@illuminate.net. I'll do my darndest. Put your phone number on there. If you'd like for me to reach out with you via the phone, I will do that as well. I'll be more than happy to do what I can and share documents as well that I use. I'd be more than willing to share some of the documents that I currently use and or help them develop the questions that I've been talking about so that they too can experience this whole look at the psychological element behind this exit planning and use it properly to really work with their clients and customers.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Greg. I appreciate that, and hopefully everyone does take that to heart and really does utilize Greg as a resource, which is what he is for us. So I appreciate that. Greg, thank you for spending some time with us today. Again, if there's any other questions, you can reach out directly to Greg or myself here at the Exit Planning Institute. We'd be more than happy to help you guys out. But with that, we can go ahead and conclude today's webinar, get everyone back into their busy day today and their busy week. But I hope everyone enjoys it, has a great rest of the week. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to give us a call or an email. Greg, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Drew. I appreciate you for hosting this and EPI for hosting it. Thanks so much.
Absolutely, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.